Hi everybody, thank you for attending today's webinar. We're going to go ahead and get started. I just wanted to draw your attention to a few things before we start. The handouts are available at the bottom of the page. You can just click on Sybil handout and click upload file or download files, and you can download those handouts, and that'll be there for the entire webinar. We're offering 20% off all of our pets products from now till the end of the week. That excludes the sets, the discounted sets, so those are only regular priced items. And if you have any questions during the webinar, go ahead and type it in the chat, and Jody will try to address it as we go through. I'm going to take her just a few seconds to switch over her audio and for us to get the PowerPoint up. So if you'll hold on for just a minute, Jody will go ahead and get started. Thanks.
Hey, I think we started. Can everyone hear me all right? We're trying a new system. For those of you who were here the last time, we're trying a new system. So let me know if we have a problem with any of the audio, and we will try to get that addressed as quickly as possible. But I want to welcome you all to the second webinar in the series on critical and creative thinking skills for the 21st century primary minds. Right? The focus today is going to be on Sybil the Scientist. And by the way, is Dodie Merritt, for those of you who are new to the series. I was involved in developing materials, worked with 3 wonderful other teachers, and these are the materials that we felt best address the needs of many of our students. So I do hope if you have questions that you will take this opportunity to address them to me. So first of all, I want to welcome you to Crystal Pond Woods. This is a wonderful poster that was put together by teachers down in Springfield, Georgia, and it kind of outlines the kinds of places that the specialists frequent. Some of this, for those of you who participated in the first webinar, I'm going to recover some materials that new people be familiar with, but we will move through those quickly. All right. The orange arrow up there to the left actually points to Sybil's lab, and we're going to sing, as I said, on Sybil the Scientist today. I actually ended up putting one of these maps up in my own hallway after I saw this one from Georgia, and I found that students, every time they went up and down the hallway, just studied the map. They loved kind of trying to figure out exactly where were the thinking specialists and put that all together. So I highly recommend this kind of a wall mural. And it's great because at Christmas you add Christmas trees and you add Santa Claus and or any other holidays, whatever kinds of characters might also be frequenting Crystal Pond Woods. The thinking specialists in the primary education thinking program are Isabel the Inventor, her best friend Yolanda the Yarnspinner, Dudley the Detective, Sybil the Scientist, who is Dudley's best friend, Max the Magician, who's responsible for visual thinking, and Judge, who is our evaluative thinker. We'll see in a moment there are about 3 levels of materials that can address that we use in this program, and these 6 thinking these 6 thinking specialists each have their own unit at 1, but at level 2 we begin to combine them so that so we find that Yolanda and Isabel are our divergent thinkers. Dudley and Sybil are the convergent thinkers. Max is our visual thinker. Jordan is the evaluative thinker. And at level 3, we present them using the same kind of language. Here you go. These are the resources that I'm talking about. And the materials that will be in this webinar series really come from, we're focusing on level 1 materials, up there the red book, which also, by the way, are available in Spanish. Right, you can see the CD there. Each of these books comes with a CD, and all the materials in the books are in PDF form on the CD that you can run off. Not just the student papers, but the stories, the lesson outlines, everything is loaded up on those CDs for you. One of the questions that often comes up is how does this relate to 21st century thinking skills? How does this program? And it was certainly one that we had in mind when we put the program together. And based on, as you can see, the ASCD position statement in 2008 and what's coming out from Partnership for 21st Century Skills, we looked at what we had in the program, and certainly all the characters talk about acquiring and thinking critically. They apply knowledge to new situations, they draw conclusions, they make informed decisions. They share knowledge and solve problems ethically and productively as members of a multicultural world. And I kind of like the multicultural part because, of course, these are all guys, they're all animals. They demonstrate creativity, innovation, flexibility when solving problems. And hopefully they encourage students to pursue their own personal and aesthetic growth. We also looked at Bloom's taxonomy when we were putting this program together. One of the things that I think is a concern to me is that we find that in the regular classroom only perhaps 10 to 30% of the time is spent on those higher level thinking strategies. And what we really need to see is far more time being spent on those higher level thinking strategies of analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. That's really where the problem solving takes place. We still need knowledge and comprehension as a base, but we really want students to be using that information, applying that information, and solving problems with it. With that in mind, if you look at this taxonomy of thinking skills, we really do find that the thinking specialist is focused on to analyze information, to examine it, to look at the parts and how it relates to the whole. They look at synthesis. Can they change something? Can they look at something in new and different ways, an idea, a concept? How can they change it and make it their own? And what happens when you evaluate something? When you look at a situation, you say, you know, there isn't one right answer here, so what's the best way to address it? How do I make judgments that I can support? And really, that's what the thinking specialists are all about, is supporting students as they develop these skills. With that in mind, clearly there is the Common Core standards, and the thinking specialists live in the same place. When you think in terms of how the Common Core standard really talks about addressing higher order thinking, that's certainly what we see in the PETS program. And in each of the books, there's a page where PETS is aligned with the Common Core standards. Now you'll notice that there's a red box down there with a 7 in it. That means that on page 7 in the red book, this is where you find this form. However, this form happens to be in all of the books, just so that you know. But at any time you see a colored number in it, that will tell you the page number in that color book. We also looked at Renzulli's enrichment triad model, where we wanted to look at general exploratory activities that would in fact present these concepts to all students. So there would be whole class activities, because we really felt that it was important to recognize that higher level thinking is important for all students. But we also recognize that students are ready sooner for more challenging activities. So we also looked at sort of what we called level 2, type 2 activities for students, small group activities. With that in mind, if you look at the books, they're set up with whole class activities and small group activities. But one of the things I've found with the program is that it's really, really flexible, and while we may have set it up that way in the books, it doesn't mean that that's how it has to be delivered. I know some teachers, depending upon the profile of their classroom, who use all of the materials with their whole class. I know some teachers that use all the materials just in small settings with their students that are ready for something different than the rest of the class. Teachers that use just different parts that apply the most concretely to what they're doing in their own classrooms. So there really is a lot of flexibility to how you can use the program materials. What you do so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel is that for each of the lessons there is, as you can see here, there's a whole class, there's a teacher outline of your materials, what you need to do, there's the lesson plan, there's a look at the challenge pages, which are things that students can do outside the lesson time itself. You've got your answer keys for those of you that want to use these materials to help determine student readiness levels. There are diagnostic notes, stories, and then you also get, as you can see here, the actual activity page for students. Today, we're going to be working with Sybil the Scientist, all right, Dudley's best friend. She likes to study the parts of things. She likes to sort and classify them. Right. She's really the one that likes to take all of those, look at all of the characteristics and attributes of things that are around her. I mentioned using pets as a diagnostic tool. There are times when one is trying to put a handle on exactly what readiness levels are like for students. And one of the things that we found is that using these checklists that can be used to identify certain behaviors that are real helpful when you're discussing students administratively or with parents. As you can see here on this behavioral checklist, they're set up with cells, and teachers can keep track of the students that are demonstrating certain behaviors. And there's one of these for each one of the thinking specialists. And this on pages 94 and 95 is where you would find the checklist for Sybil, thinking like a scientist. All right. There are 2 pages because one of the things that I discovered was that even though I felt that the cells were pretty straightforward in what they were expressing, that I had teachers in my school district who worried sometimes about just whether or not they were putting down the right student names, whether they really understood what was being considered. So there's 2 pages here and one would be back to back with the checklist. And the purpose here is that I've actually annotated, we've gone through and annotated what we're looking for in each of those cells, the kinds of behaviors that we're actually looking for. Right. Thinking like a scientist involves being able to identify attributes accurately. These are the titles that are in each of those cells. Being able to create classification systems that work. So you look at all these things, can you actually generalize in such a way that you can classify these materials? Who are the students that actually come up with rather unique ways of classifying? Where's that sort of creativity piece that comes in? Really looking at things differently than other students. This is being able to defer judgment is a really important characteristic. It's so easy in this society to just want to jump to the first thought, jump to that easy conclusion. A good scientist defers judgment, looks at all the data before moving on to a possible solution. A good scientist also is able to draw relationships between what you're teaching right there in the classroom and outside information. You know, they can make that connection between what's right in front of them and what's not right in front of them. A good scientist can recognize flawed reasoning. When here's a classification system, but you know what? I don't think it really works. What's wrong with it? They can actually identify those pieces because they've analyzed the situation carefully. They can actually identify where the reasoning isn't working. And thinking like a scientist means that you can retain information that you've learned in the past. So those are what the kinds of cells, that's the information that you'll be collecting on students. If you wanted to build a behavioral portfolio on students, that, you know, things that don't necessarily show up on all of the kinds of tests that we have to give to students, this is another way to assess what their readiness levels are. Now, each of the thinking specialists has what we call a memory trigger. And what that means is something that reminds students exactly what is important about that thinking specialist and the way in which he or she solves problems. Now, not surprisingly, in Sybil's case, it's a magnifying glass. Now, we included each of the thinking triggers, memory triggers, in the Red Book because we didn't want people to feel they had to go out and buy things. But I will say admittedly that some of these are major paper engineering projects in and of themselves. This does indeed make a magnifying glass of sorts that students can use, but this in itself would be a lesson, all right? I would highly recommend, as this teacher did, and you can see right here, I would highly recommend just going out and Oriental Trading has some very good deals on small magnifying glasses. Now, this particular teacher chose to introduce Sybil just before her students got involved with their fall Apple unit. So they'd already talked about what it means to be a good scientist and what a scientist does, that a scientist keeps journals, a scientist looks at things carefully, looks for all the details, and collects that data. And so before she even got out the apples and they began to examine the apples, these students already knew what it meant to be a scientist. And I included this just because over the course of the year, there are memory triggers for each of the thinking specialists, and this teacher actually kept a pocket on the student desks where they could keep their various memory triggers. This was my book that I would keep the stories in, and at level 1, there is a story that introduces each of the characters and the strengths of their thinking, their problem-solving strategies. And I just always had a book that said a story on the front, and I would say to my students, kind of the old Madeline Hunter anticipatory set, I would say, okay, folks, it's time for a story, and I'd hold up my storybook here, and the students would know to get settled, get comfortable, because then I would start to tell them a story about each of the thinking specialists. Now, at levels 2 and 3 in the green books and the blue books, there is a story that actually introduces every single lesson. What I thought, this was something that I hadn't seen before. This was something that I came across last year with a teacher. She actually went into the story about Sybil, and Sybil's story starts talking about what it means to be a scientist, what a scientist does, and there are words that are boldface in the story that are science words, like hypothesis, and as you can see here, observations, data, classify, attributes. These are like key words that apply to Sybil, and she actually put together this page for her students because each of her students actually has an all about thinking binder, and they would put their page of Sybil's words would be in the section on Sybil. And I just thought that was a great idea because these are certainly the words that we want students to be familiar with as they work with Sybil. Now, in her story, what we find is that, well, first of all, one of the first things that happens in the story is that she gets introduced and they show the picture of Sybil, and unfortunately I don't have an enlarged one right here in front of me, but they talk a lot about what are the things that are in her pockets and why does she have them. And I think this is a great way to get the students started. Actually, they're looking at the details to start with. What do they see in her pockets? They see books, they see, the magnifying glass, they see pens, they see scissors. There's a whole variety of different materials. And asking them, why do they think? Let them predict. Why do they think that Sybil has these things. What does she get from the books? What does she get? Why would she have scissors? What's the importance of the magnifying glass? So that they begin to think about what kinds of tools Sybil is using as she solves different kinds of problems. The story then goes on that she goes out to play. There's a softball game going on out in Crystal Pond Woods, probably in the meadow. And while she's out there, she discovers some very, very interesting creatures. So she collects these creatures, and while they are black and white in the book itself, there is a colorized version of these creatures on the CD that comes with the books now. And I've also included a colorized version of these creatures in your handout so that you have these. Because they do need to be colored. And the one that you don't want to do is color them all the same, because we don't want this to be terribly simple for some of our students. We want them to think a little bit. And she brings them back to the lab. And of course, what the goal is that she has some places to keep them in her laboratory that she's going to classify them. Now, obviously, the cages are set up here so that there are, or homes, we could call them homes. There are 4 homes here and each one needs a label. And we're looking to organize them in 4 ways. Now, one of the things about Sybil is that she looks at those characteristics and those attributes and really carefully identifies them. But there may be, although her decisions and her solutions are based on her data, there may be more than one answer, which makes her a little bit different than her best friend, Dudley the Detective, who is in fact looking and solving problems that have one and only one right answer. So her first hypothesis is, well, maybe I can do them by the number of feet that they have. So she began to organize them according to the number of feet that they had, and began to realize right away that there were some, like this guy right here, who had no feet. Well, that wasn't going to work. And that there was somebody, and these are not all of the characters. Well, this guy up here has 6 feet. Well, that's not going to work. So she realized right away that that hypothesis wasn't going to work, and that often happens with scientists. And I think it's really important for students to realize that it's okay to make a prediction, have an hypothesis, prove it wrong. I mean, that's what happens in science all the time, and then have to go back and rethink this. So she decided that maybe she could try, what if she organized them maybe more according to design, like maybe dots. Well, if she did dots, then this guy could go there. More than one head. Well, this guy could go there. What could she do? And this guy would go with dots. The important thing is to try to come up with titles where if you put stripes here, the problem is this guy could go in 2 places. So to try to keep the groups discrete where they don't overlap. It's really tough. And the story, as it's set up, you may find at the end that they can't come up with a solution. And that's not a bad thing either. That sometimes it's hard to come up with an answer that works. So they can organize these any way they want to, as long as they works. We did have one young man recently, a 1st grader, who decided that to do it based on necks. And it almost works. It almost works without fail. He got stuck at the very last one, but it was like no neck, thin neck, fat neck, long neck. brainstormer and creative thinker, was more open-ended as far as participation was concerned, and I could encourage and support students and say, and get them really engaged and enthusiastic, whereas Dudley is about one right answer. So you get it wrong, and it can be, it might be discouraging for some students if we started out with things that they were right or wrong. So I like to start with Isabel. Now, the teacher that had the apple activity, she started with Sybil because she knew that that's where she was going to be starting, and she had, early first graders, and she thought they know about attributes and characteristics, and it's a good place to start. The only character I would say is important to do towards the end is Jordan the Judge, because, as we will find out, his evaluative thinking really involves analysis. It involves creative thinking as well. His problem-solving strategies really build on what you learn from Isabel and what you learn from Dudley and the others. I know some teachers that will save Max because he's very different. Visual thinking is such a change from the other thinking specialists, but we really felt in the 21st century that it was important to include Max and visual thinking. They save him sometimes for the very end because it's so different, and you know what happens in April and May. Kids begin to sort of, I don't want to say check out, but they certainly have other interests sometimes, and Max is a good way to re-engage them with the thinking specialist. So if you did Jordan sort of second to last and Max last. But I know some schools where they don't have time to do all of the characters, so they might do some of them at first grade. They might choose 2 others to do at second grade. A lot depends on how much time you have, where if they best fit in with your curriculum. I can't stress enough that as fun as this is like a special. It's like neat to have, let's just do thinking specialist stuff. You'll get the biggest value out of this program if you can connect it to what's happening in your classroom, with the curriculum in your classroom. So that the kids see that this is not just game time, but that this actually has a connection to how they learn and how they solve problems with their curriculum. So look at your curriculum. You might say, we're doing this unit, or this is what we're doing here. This is the time for this character to be introduced. Okay, Marianne's typing again. Let's see. Well, I thought that 4 o'clock like this one would be a good time because it would be before people leave in the afternoon, in most cases leave for home, and it would be after most schools are out. Students have gone home. So the plan was 4 p.m. again. I like that time, but I'm open to suggestions if people have other requests. You're right, I should have put that on the slide. 4 p.m. on October 2nd. Is the plan at the moment. Is there anything people want me to address? We're going to talk about Isabel the next time, by the way. Well, obviously that's clear, it's on the slide. But is there anything in particular that people want me to address in future webinars? Well, you can always email us. You can always go to the PETS website, and you can put requests or questions on the PETS website. So since there doesn't seem to be, oh, Marianne has a thought. As long as people have thoughts, I will stay. But I think we are winding down. Okay, Marianne, what are you asking? Okay, all right. And I think what I'm going to do too is I understand. My concern was new people coming in this time, and so I think what I will check the registration list, and if it turns out that we have a lot of people that are returning, we'll move right into the lessons more quickly. Okay? Sounds good to me too. All right, folks, I think that's it. Thank you very, very much. Thank you for being with us today. And I'll see you in October, or I'll talk to you in October.